Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio.
Welcome to Policy and Rights, the show about government policy and human rights.
On this World Post Day, we mark a historic milestone, the 150th anniversary of the Universal Postal Union. In times of war and peace, crisis and upheaval, the International Postal Network has delivered, connecting communities and upholding the fundamental right to communicate. The UPU is also one of the earliest examples of multilateralism in action. Global cooperation helped guarantee a single postal territory worldwide, one that leaves no one behind by delivering messages, goods, and financial services to some of the most remote places on Earth. Looking ahead, the UPU continues to leverage new technologies to provide essential services to humanity. On this important day, let's honor and celebrate the work of the Universal Postal Union to bridge distances and unite the world.
So, there's been a failed assassination attempt by Israel. In their bombing attempts, they were attempting to assassinate a Hezbollah leader. And in the process, what they managed to actually do was to kill an entire refugee family with the bombing. The bombing was also close to the peacekeeper, the UNIFIL peacekeepers, and who are stationed in Lebanon to observe. They are really not supposed to be direct. They are not supposed to directly engage in any of the fighting. And as such, they are supposed to be kept out of the fighting altogether and treated as though they are actually protected civilians. A UNIFIL spokesperson said it was alarmed and deeply concerned after it said Israeli forces deliberately fired on positions, injuring two peacekeepers. The alleged attacks brought expressions of outrage from the member states of the United Nations who contributed troops to UNIFIL. The two injured peacekeepers were Indonesian, and the Israeli military confirmed its troops opened fire in an area of peacekeeping mission base, claiming that Hezbollah fighters were operating from within it. And near a civilian area in southern Lebanon, including areas near that UNIFIL post. So, I just got this report straight from someone who is based in Lebanon right now. Basically, my opinion on this is that Israel does need to ensure that their information that a Hezbollah person is operating from there, they need to actually ensure that and find other more peaceful means of extracting that person if they wish to take them into custody. So, and respect the rules of not engaging peacekeepers that are in the area. All right. Welcome back to Policy and Race here on Depictions Media Radio. I'm your host, Michael Clogs. So, once again, we're back to the table and talking about violence against women. Again, it is something that is happening around the world, that women are being denied the right to school. They're being the right to vote, to work. That in a lot of cultures around the world, that women only have the right to be inside the house and cook and clean for the men. Even if we only find one place in the world that is actually like that, that would be one place too many. We all should be seen as equal, and the second that one of us or a group of us is singled out and diminished, that means that all of us who are seeking human rights are now been diminished. So we all need to stand together and make sure that we're all seen equal. So that would be my actual rant on this. But we're going to hear from Special Rapporteur on violence against women and girls, Reem Alsalem from the United Nations, as she is addressing reporters on October 8th about violence against women and girls in sport. She also explored other forms, causes, consequences of violence against women and girls in sports, including sexual violence, coercion, gender pay gaps, gender stereotypes, patriarchal structures, abusive coaches, and the general absence of robust policies and mechanisms to address abuses against the perpetrators and protecting victims. And also in today's episode, speaking of women in politics, we're going to hear from Melanie Joly as she speaks about a stance on Iran, and also talks about there's also going to be some mention in that segment about some other conservative motions, and about the Senate bill in Canada for C-282, as it's trying to protect the rights of Canadian artists and help those Canadian artists be found more globally. And there are some pros and there's some cons to that. Again, that if you aren't on a specific list or approved by the CRTC, that they also have this bill also gives the Canadian government to block your content in Canada, even if you are a Canadian artist. So quite a bit with the women and violence, and how the government is putting its hand into places to make sure that the message is the message that they want. If you say something, if you start speaking too boldly against certain things, that you might get blocked. So why don't we start with the United Nations and hear what Special Rapporteur Alsalem has to say about women and violence against women and girls.
Okay, there we go. All right. We're very pleased to have with us Special Rapporteur Reem Alsalem. She is the Special Rapporteur for Violence Against Women and Girls, its causes and its consequences. As you know, the Special Rapporteur is in New York because it's the annual session of the Third Committee. The Third Committee addresses issues of social development as well as human rights. And so in her briefing earlier today, the Special Rapporteur spoke about the various types of violence that women and girls face, specifically in sports. And to reiterate, the Special Rapporteur, and this goes for all Special Rapporteurs, all independent experts, is an independent voice. She's independent from the United Nations. Madame, whenever you're ready.
So good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming and for your interest in engaging with me on my report. As was just mentioned, I just presented my report on violence against women and girls in sport. I actually chose this topic because as an approach to my mandate, I like to focus on themes that raise complex issues, complex human rights issues, and that may not have been unpacked sufficiently from that perspective, as well as shed the light on groups of women and girls that are discriminated against or that may experience violence on intersecting grounds, but that have not been sufficiently discussed as such. Not to mention that, of course, we had the Paris Olympics this year, and there's a number of emergent issues that women and girls confront in sports, hence my decision to do a dedicated report to violence against women and girls in sport. In a nutshell, I've concluded that violence against women and girls in sport is a serious, systemic, and systematic human rights issue that demands immediate attention at all levels. As said, women and girls in sport face multiple forms of violence, and I outline them in the report: economic forms of violence, physical, psychological, coercive control, online violence, and also for children, girls, they face neglect, particularly in some sports such as gymnastics. I have detailed the structural causes of violence against women and girls in sport, which include, amongst others, male-dominated cultures, underrepresentation of women in leadership roles, unequal investment in female sports, and all these are challenges that are particularly exacerbated for groups of women based on their sex, gender, age, race, religion, disability, etc. The report also details systemic barriers that prevent women and girls from participating in sport on equal footing with men and boys. And these include harmful social stereotypes, the pervasive sexism in sport, the absence of role models, the unequal share of caregiving responsibilities that women have to put up with, and the limited access to training facilities, infrastructure, and resources, particularly when compared to what men and boys have. The report also describes the most common perpetrators of violence and their accomplices, which include state and non-state actors. So I speak about coaches, professional colleagues, family members, managers, spectators, policymakers, and I assert within that conversation that states can also be considered complicit when they fail to prevent, prosecute, and sanction acts of violence against women and girls in sport. Now, as we know, women and girls in sport already have so many odds stacked against them that impede their equal and effective participation. So in addition to all these that I've just mentioned, their ability to play sports in condition of safety, dignity, and fairness has been further eroded by the intrusion of males who identify as female in female-only sports categories and spaces. So I've called for the creation in sports of open categories and the reintroduction or the introduction of non-invasive, confidential, and simple sex screenings where necessary to ensure the inclusive participation of all persons in sports, however they may identify, while guaranteeing fairness, safety, and dignity for female athletes. I also make a strong recommendation to all actors to address the issue of impunity for acts of violence committed, because this continued impunity fosters the culture of silence and injustice. And that is brought about in part by the autonomous regulatory frameworks of sports organizations that we have, which don't sufficiently incorporate a human rights lens or framework in the work, and they tend to prioritize reputation and winning over justice and accountability to victims. I made a very deliberate decision to also include references to good practices adopted particularly by states, but also by other actors. And I was very heartened, actually, by the high number of input I received from states for this report compared to other reports. But this is stemming out of my belief that a number of actors, including states, are trying to address the causes of violence against women and girls in sport, are trying to improve and encourage the participation of women and girls in sports, and that sharing good practices is also beneficial for taking these efforts forward. I think there is a recognition across the board globally that sports can be a very important vehicle for bringing about social change, for achieving sex and gender equality, and for empowering women and girls to take up, obviously, their rightful place in society. After all, they're half of society. But that this will not happen unless everyone commits to making sports safer and fairer for women and girls. So with that, I'll stop here, and happy to take any questions that you may have.
And if you don't mind, please introduce yourself.
Thank you. My name is Justicia. I'm a Dag Hammarskjöld's fellow, a journalist from Namibia. With this report, in terms of sports, I just wanted to find out which sport code is most prevalent to violence for women and girls, and also what age ranges are this violence on women and girls more prone to, and in what regions do these women and girls experience most violence when it comes to sports?
You want me to address? Thank you for that. So, as this is a global report, I have not delved into individual sports, with the exception of neglect, where, as I said, there was a clear indication that neglect can be experienced particularly by girls in gymnastics. And that also the sports that emphasize, let's say, lightness and shape, the girls and women in those can experience a lot of body shaming, which I consider to be a form of violence.
My name is Ridwan Karim Dini Osman. I'm also a Dag Hammarskjöld Fellow, and I report for the EIB network in Ghana. I would like you to throw more light on the methodology, the sample size, which countries were, involved in this report. I would also like to find out, I know women and girls are often most vulnerable, but we've also heard of instances where boys are sexually abused by their colleague in the same, field of sport.
Yeah.
And the thing with boys is that there is a lot of stigma in coming out to say that you have been sexually violated. So they never come out. Is this something that has come to your attention, or is this something that you intend to pursue in the future? Thank you.
So with regards to the methodology, I followed the methodology that I follow for all my reports. We usually put out a call for input. So we invite any actors, could be actual women and girls in sports, could be civil society, could be experts, states. So anyone can send confidential input. And I've received for this over 100 pieces of input. Then we usually obviously do also research, secondary available resources, sources that are credible and solid. And then we organize also expert consultations. I've organized expert consultations that were cross-regional, again, intersectional also from including different actors that have also very different views about some of the issues that I have raised. And then based on that, I do my analysis. Keep in mind that in the end, I look for information that supports the human rights-centered analysis that I'm trying to do. So it's looking at the rights of women and girls in sports as enshrined in international human rights law, but also therefore the rights that are violated and the rights and the duties of duty bearers like states, like sports associations towards them. So the common denominator through all these sections is what does human rights law say about that, rather than an academic sort of piece of work. With regards to your comment about boys, I fully agree. I'm sure there are a lot of forms of violence that boys share with girls. Regrettably, or not, but my mandate focuses on violence against women and girls, and therefore I have to keep that focus in my reports and engagement, so I couldn't go into those details. However, that said, what is clear is that when we also carry out educational programs to address violence against women and girls, we have to also target men and boys, not just through education, but also other approaches. So.
We'll go here first, and then Pamela, and then Al-Hamid.
Thank you. Am I allowed to go off topic? Is that allowed?
Yes,
Thank
please
you.
do, yeah.
I want to ask you a question about the situation.
Can you introduce yourself?
Yes, yeah. I'm Sharifa Chitin from Anadolu Agency. Recent analysis and studies are indicating that more women and children have been killed in Gaza by the Israeli military in the past year than in any other recent conflict over a single year. And we have also seen reports that Palestinian women and girls are subject to sexual violence by Israeli soldiers. And you must have seen on social media, in the houses that they have destroyed, they pose with their undergarments, and it's quite disrespectful. Israel has also destroyed Gaza's largest fertility clinic, and the United Nations is often defining the situation in Gaza as a war on women and a war on children. So do you think Israel is systematically attacking women and children in Gaza, and if so, why? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure you are aware that I have also repeatedly spoken and expressed alarm at the treatment of Palestinian women and children, civilians, but particularly also women and children, including girls, and at all the forms of violence that have been experienced by them, including sexual violence. And here, maybe to also refer to the previous comment, we know Palestinian men have also experienced sexual violence. Yesterday marked the one-year anniversary since October the 7th, and we also issued a statement in which we also condemned the killing and violence committed against Israelis and foreign nationals on October 7th, including sexual violence where that has been determined to be the case. I have also specifically spoken about the use of reproductive violence in the war on Gaza, in the unfolding genocide in Gaza, which is unparalleled in other conflicts. And some of the examples you have mentioned, I think there has been a relentless attack on women for being the reproductive bearers of Palestinian lives. We have seen that through the killing of and orders to abandon newly born infants, the attack on the fertility clinic, the huge dehydration and hunger that pregnant and lactating women go through, not to mention the attack on the health infrastructure, which obviously you need hospitals to also deliver. So there's definitely a deliberate attack there, and it's linked to the way in which Palestinian women and children have been deliberately dehumanized, not just by the Israeli government, but I would say by many parts of Israeli society and actors with influence. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
Pamela, you had raised your hand.
Yes, I still do.
And then Hami.
Thank you. Thank you for the briefing. It's Pamela Falk from U.S. News and World Report. There, some of the other UN agencies, UNICEF in particular, have some of the violence numbers up to about 2022. Since in the last 2 years, put it that way, have you seen a rise in violence against women and girls around the world?
Overall, you mean?
Yeah.
So, it's obviously difficult to really compare very clearly because we've always said that there is a problem with the data that we have. So, on one hand, you can see a marked increase in certain things, certain phenomena. Like take femicide, for example, the deliberate the killing of women because they are women or girls. So in some instances, if we see an increase, that could be related to the fact that there are more killings taking place and therefore more impunity for this violence. However, in some instances, it could be also improved reporting and improved data collection. But what we know is that globally, the issue of violence continues to be really an emergency scale phenomenon. 1 in 3 women experience gender-based violence of a serious nature. Yes, and I would say that this is an understatement, even it's a tip of the iceberg. What, though, we also see is that there is this attempt to decriminalize or delegitimize or normalize serious forms of violence against women. So we've all heard about attempts to, for example, roll back on the criminalization of female genital mutilation. We know that during war, we've seen really an alarming use of violence against women and girls, including sexual violence, reproductive violence as tools of war, with the threats to international humanitarian law and the law of armed conflict and the protection to civilians and protection to women. I would say that this has exposed women to increased violence and exploitation during conflict and humanitarian settings, because the respect, I think, by warring parties to these rights and standards is leaves much to be desired and is worsening. And then, of course, other forms like child marriage. So things we've taken for granted. There are attempts to roll back those rights. And that is very concerning. And I, as I've said to the Council, the Human Rights Council in June, I consider prostitution very much a system of violence and exploitation of women and girls, including pornography. And therefore, attempts we see in some corners of the world to normalize the buying of sexual acts means normalizing that violence as well.
And a quick follow-up. Does your office deal with the abduction of children? In other words, the estimated 20,000 children who were taken from Ukraine to Russia and their treatment?
So in principle, if this came to my attention as a mandate holder, I would be able to deal with it. I have not dealt with that situation specifically. I'm aware of it, but my mandate has not received information on that. I have engaged with the Ukrainian government recently on a draft law in order to provide reparations for survivors of sexual violence as a result of the Russian aggression on Ukraine. And I have dealt with the issue of abduction within the issue of family custody cases, where a parent may forcefully remove a child, and the reasons for that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You've been very patient. Thank you.
Thank you, Reem. Abdelhamid Sayam from the Arabic daily Al-Quds Al-Arabi. I have few interrelated questions.
Please.
First, I will ask you if you visited Gaza since October 7, and since your mandate is in general about sexual violation of women, if you also tell us more about the situation of pregnant women in Gaza and their suffering when they give, and how they can have a safe birth of their infants. And since you worked in the past for the ICC, can you shed more light about the relation between your office and the prosecutor, and if you can put some reports to help prosecutor reach that decision who is committing war crimes in Gaza? And as you know, there are many number of Palestinian women were released from jail, and they all gave testimony about sexual harassment and sexual abuse. If you put a report about that, have you met with them? Have you talked to any of those women? Thank you very much.
Thank you. So within the first few months of after October 7th, I had written actually to both the government of Palestine and the government of Israel requesting a visit in order to be able to also examine more closely first-hand information about the events on October 7th, but also since then. The state of Palestine had welcomed a visit, but it is physically impossible, also because we would need permission by the government of Israel to go. And it is both, it's not possible to go to Gaza or actually the West Bank at the moment, let's say in safety and security in order to do that work. The government of Israel never responded to my request for a visit. I had also requested Israeli civil society organizations, victims, and the government for information about the events of October the 7th. I have not received that. With regards to your question about engagement with the ICC, let me tell you how we engage generally with courts. With some courts, we do have, depending on the theme and the topic at hand, we may share some information with specific judges on sort of the work that we're doing. We do also engage with courts on emblematic cases, strategic litigation. So we might be we might be there through an amicus brief if we think that the issue is very important. As you know, the Special Rapporteur on the occupied territories has also been leading on the engagement with the International Court of Justice, on the ICC, and also called on states and all stakeholders to collaborate with both actually in their work. On sexual harassment and violence, I'm sure you're aware that the mandate had led on a letter to Israel regarding reports of sexual violence conducted against Palestinian women. In general, we receive our information from either victims, organizations representing them, or other actors, and that information is confidential. So I cannot really elaborate on who I met with or who I didn't, but our procedures are open to receiving in a confidential manner information from all actors, and then taking action if we so desire. On pregnant women, I think I've sort of spoken to that the conditions really for life have been decimated in Gaza, and therefore also for the creation of new life and for birth Yeah.
Hi, Reem. Dawn Clancy. How are you? I have two questions related to the report and something else. You mentioned it here as well about the idea of creating open categories of competition.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what kind of feedback or pushback you got related to that. And then I also wanted to ask you about the pharmaceutical testosterone suppression and how that isn't really a good indicator or doesn't really level the playing field between transgender women and biological women. Thank you.
So as you saw in the report, I maintain and recognize the right and importance of everyone to participate in sports. At the same time, it is not uncommon in human rights law to have a tension between rights and rights holders. And I think this is a situation of tension, but for which there is a good practical solution, which not just I, but others have recommended. And that is to, in order to ensure fairness, dignity, and safety for all, including females, so women and girls, females, we would need to maintain a female-only category in sports, while at the same time also having more open categories for those wishing to play sports in categories that do not respond to the sex they were born into. That is one thing. The other thing is to, as requested by many women and girls in sport, is to bring back, or actually not bring back, is to introduce sex screening, which, as you know, was discontinued in 1999. So that should be sex screening, which have become a lot more reliable now, are cheap, can be administered in a confidential, dignified manner, should be introduced for those, where sports is should be introduced as a sort of as an element of what is that called? Eligibility. Sorry. Eligibility in female sports. So that's that. And as we know from the many studies that we have, males have a biological advantage in sport, especially during and after puberty. And artificial suppression of testosterone does not do away with this advantage. This is what the scientists and the experts are saying. Not to mention that pressuring anyone to artificially suppress testosterone in order to qualify for any category also raises ethical and human rights issues, which I also spoke about in the report, and should therefore also not be done.
I don't know if anyone else has any questions in the room. I don't see any online. Special Rapporteur, I know you just briefed the third committee.
There was one
yeah, let me give you one more.
Yes, you asked me about the pushback, the reactions to. So I was very pleased to see really a very high engagement by member states with my report. They had clearly read it, engaged with the recommendations. As expected, there were states who spoke in favor and supported the findings and recommendations. There were others who expressed support and disagreed with it. I see this really in a positive light because it also means that we are finally discussing issues as we should be discussing them, openly, transparently, because it's counterproductive and problematic also from a human rights perspective to have issues as a taboo and not to be able to discuss them. And while continuing to adapt certain policies. So I'm hoping that at least today marked sort of a new chapter where some of these issues can be now discussed more openly, and where different views can feed into decision making and the design of policies and legal frameworks.
All right. Thank you very much, Special Rapporteur.
Thank you so much for your time. Yeah.
The Assembly will hear an address by Her Excellency Mia Amor Motley, Minister, Minister for National Security.
And foremost, when it comes to Florida, our hearts and hers are with people in Florida that are facing a devastating hurricane, which is Hurricane Milton. To all Canadians that are registered with the embassy, every one of you should have received an email. And the message is clear, is please follow the U.S. authorities' evacuation orders. This is about making sure that your life is safe, that the life of your loved ones are safe as well. And for all of those who are thinking of going to Florida right now, wait, this is not the time. So, of course, we're in contact with American officials. Donc, pour tous ceux et celles qui sont présentement en Floride, bien entendu, nos pensées sont avec vous. Le plus important présentement, c'est, s'il vous plaît, suivez les ordres d'évacuation. Vous savez, il y a plusieurs politiciens qui sont sortis pour vous dire de faire attention à votre vie, de faire attention justement et de suivre les ordres d'évacuation. S'il vous plaît, faites-le. Et pour tous ceux et celles qui pensent aller en Floride présentement, attendez, ce n'est pas le temps. Tous ceux et celles qui ont été enregistrés auprès de l'ambassade, vous devriez avoir reçu un courriel et essentiellement le message est celui que je viens de vous donner. Donc, je suis en contact, l'équipe est en contact avec des membres des autorités américaines et on suit la question de très près. Oui, Lebanon. Donc, now, on the question of Lebanon, 122 Canadians are leaving Lebanon today on a new flight, and we're also assisting the departure of 15 UK citizens. Tomorrow there will be 100 new seats on a flight between, again, Beirut and Istanbul, and there will be more to come. At this point, we're at 1,200 Canadians that have been assisted in departing Lebanon. And of course, my message is always the same. The situation is extremely volatile, extremely dangerous. Please, if you're offered a seat, take it. What we're seeing is there's around 100 people contacting us now per day to get more information about assisted departures. Everybody should have been contacted. So please make sure to go on the website of Global Affairs Canada, seeing the link to Lebanon, and get the information. It's really, really important. Donc, présentement, aujourd'hui, il y a 122 personnes qui quittent le Liban et on va appuyer le départ de 15 citoyens britanniques. Demain, il y a environ 100 sièges qui sont réservés pour des citoyens canadiens pour quitter Beyrouth en direction d'Istanbul. Il y a environ 1200 Canadiens qui ont, à ce stade-ci, été soutenus dans cette opération de départ assisté. Et il va y avoir plus d'informations qui vont être données au cours des prochains jours à cet effet-là. Et ce que je peux vous dire aussi, c'est que il y a environ 100 personnes par jour qui nous contactent, qui communiquent avec nous pour avoir plus d'informations. Toutes ces personnes-là sont contactées. Et donc, si vous avez des questions, n'hésitez pas à communiquer avec Affaires mondiales Canada. Oui.
On Mr. Poilievre's comments yesterday, he said he doubled down on his comments that he would support Israel proactively striking Iran's nuclear sites. Does that concern you about an escalation, or is that something that Canada would support as well?
First and foremost, the position of Canada has always been to bring back peace and stability to the Middle East. Israel has said that they would retaliate and that they would do so, and consequences would be severe. What the G7 has said, all countries of the G7, is that answer needed to be proportionate. And that's what we'll continue to advocate for. And we stand along the 7 most influential and impactful countries in the world.
And so specifically targeting those nuclear sites, would that be proportionate?
My point is it needs to be proportionate, and the President of the United States has already said that he's against it.
On Lebanon, can I just ask you, just for Canadians whose family members are non-Canadian, they're not Canadian.
Sorry, you're talking about Lebanon?
Yes, Lebanon. Do they need a Canadian visa to get on these flights, these Canadian flights? Because we're hearing that they can't get on.
Yeah, so that's a very good question. We've been having 2 approaches. We've been sometimes offering charters, and sometimes we've been offering seats on commercial flights. So we've been able to adjust to the different realities of Canadians. So in that sense, we've been able to offer solutions to Canadians that had issues with some of their loved ones, basically children or spouses, that didn't have all their documents ready. That being said, my message is always the same. Get your documents ready. It's really important. But I understand that at this point, because we've been dealing with more than 1,000 Canadians that have different circumstances, from different walks of life, that's why we've been able to be adaptable.
For those who don't have the documents, like what option is there? Can they take the charter? Can they take the seats that are reserved?
They can take the seats, and that's on commercial flights because we're sending them to Turkey. So that's why we've been
need a visa on the commercial flights.
That's why we've been working with some cases.
On the hurricane, do you have an idea of how many Canadians are in Florida at the moment? It's a popular spot for snowbirds. And what would your advice be if people have property down there and are worried about their property in the aftermath of what happens?
So on that very question, my department will be able to answer you today, because of course I asked that question, and we know that there are millions of Canadians that go to Florida every year. That being said, as of now, how many are in the affected region? I need to get back to you with that number. That being said, we know all of us go to Florida. We don't necessarily register with the embassy. And so when you look at the number, it's just an indication, but that's clearly not the entire picture.
And for people with property down there in the aftermath of the storm, what should they be doing and who should they be contacting? And how might consular services be impacted for the Canadians who are down there right now in a natural disaster scenario like this?
So in every form, could you just, thank you. Okay, so for everyone that is affected by the situation, of course, people need to follow evacuation orders because you have to follow the local authorities, what they say. And you've heard it many times, it's a question of life or death. So people need to follow the evacuation orders. It's really, really important. And we're there to assist anybody that has questions or need help. Of course, Canada stands ready.
La sanction que M. Poilievre a eue de ne pas pouvoir parler pendant une journée, est-ce que c'est assez sévère, selon vous?
Non.
Il devrait être tenu au silence plus longtemps.
Mais c'est parce que la réalité avec Pierre Poilievre, là, c'est que même s'il continue à dire des mensonges, c'est pas parce qu'il continue que ça va devenir une vérité. Fait que là, il a continué à dire ses mensonges hier, puis là, il va continuer aujourd'hui. Puis entre-temps, il s'est toujours pas excusé. Et moi, je vais mettre la pression sur Pierre Poilievre chaque jour pour faire en sorte qu'il s'excuse.
Sur ses commentaires sur Israël ce serait correct qui bombarde, qui cible des sites nucléaires en Iran. Est-ce que ça vous inquiète? Vous parlez constamment de désescalade. Est-ce que c'est ce genre de commentaires-là?
Le problème avec Pierre Poilievre, là, c'est que lorsqu'il regarde le conflit au Moyen-Orient, il est pas capable de dire le mot paix. C'est comme un tabou. Là, présentement, ce que les gens au Canada veulent,
c'est un retour à la stabilité et à la paix. C'est ce que les gens en Israël veulent, c'est ce que les gens à Gaza veulent, c'est ce que les gens en Cisjordanie veulent, c'est ce que les gens au Liban veulent. Sincèrement, là, le plus important, c'est qu'on puisse ramener de la stabilité et de la paix au Moyen-Orient. La position du Canada, elle est historique. Et c'est ça que Pierre Poilievre fait en sorte de changer comme position. La position du Canada, ça a toujours été qu'on pense que c'est une bonne chose d'avoir une solution à 2 États. Parce qu'à terme, la solution va être la même. Les Israéliens, les Palestiniens ont le droit de vivre en paix et en sécurité, l'un à côté de l'autre dans leur État. Et c'est la position du Canada depuis 30 ans, depuis les accords d'Oslo. Et c'est la position que le gouvernement Netanyahu est contre. Et c'est la position que le Hamas essaie d'empêcher. Et c'est pour ça qu'ils ont lancé les attentats du 7 octobre dernier. Et c'est pour ça aussi qu'ils détiennent encore des otages. Alors, nous, ce qu'on demande, c'est un cessez-le-feu immédiat à Gaza, la libération des otages. Le Hamas doit déposer ses armes. On doit avoir un cessez-le-feu avec le Liban, donc c'est-à-dire entre le Hezbollah et Israël. Et on doit avoir une désescalade. Un point, c'est tout.
Cibler les installations nucléaires. Est-ce que c'est proportionnel, selon le Canada, de cibler les installations nucléaires?
Le droit international est clair là-dessus. Lorsque on vient à des interventions militaires, on doit viser les sites militaires. Un point, c'est tout. Donc, la question que vous me posez a déjà été répondue au niveau du point. Okay. So, the problem with Pierre Poilievre is that using the term peace is a taboo for him. We all know that what is required right now in the Middle East is peace and stability. That's what people in Israel want. That's what people in Gaza want. That's what people in Lebanon want. That's what people in the West Bank want. And Canada has had the same position for 30 years since the Oslo Accords, which is the one of a two-state solution, which Pierre Poilievre is actually against. And you know what? The Netanyahu government is also against. And Hamas is also against. Because Hamas wanted to launch the attack on 7th of October last year to make sure that that would not happen. And not only that the deal with Saudi Arabia would not happen. Also, they still have the hostages and they haven't released them. And they're still in control of Gaza. And so our position is clear. We need to bring back peace and stability to the Middle East. We need, like I said, a ceasefire in Gaza and the release of hostages, and Hamas must lay down its weapons. We need a ceasefire in Lebanon between Hezbollah and Israel, and we need to make sure that ultimately we bring back peace and stability in the Middle East.
Are you saying that this the proposal of Mr. Poilievre to preemptively strike nuclear production facilities, are you saying that that's against international law or against Canada's policy towards how to get to peace?
Well, first, it is against international law, period. Second, we need to make sure that there's a proportionate response by Israel to, of course, an attack that they were victims of by Iran. So that's why the G7 came as one. And we said we need to make sure that Israel has a proportionate response. So I was talking with American colleagues again yesterday to make sure that we put pressure on the Israeli government. And at the same time, that we're able to put pressure on all parties, and Iran, who's a terrorist regime, with all its terrorist proxies, which are Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, to make sure that we put pressure on them too. So diplomacy is still happening, and diplomacy can bring back peace and stability to the Middle East.
So is it time for Canada then to accelerate its recognition of the other state in this two-state solution, Palestine?
Well, the committee is already looking into that right now. I've had numerous conversations.
Independent, though. You said before that this committee is doing independent work.
Yeah, that's it. But that's why they're doing that independent work, which is important. What we said on the recognition of Palestine, which is our position that I announced back in May, and the Prime Minister announced back in May, and that I mentioned at the UN's also at the General Assembly 2 weeks ago, is that Canada, when it will be the right time, will recognize the Palestinian state. Why? Because there are two things. First, the Netanyahu government is against it. Second,
Hamas is still in control of Gaza and in control of hostages, and that's why, since we don't have the right parties to get it, Canada reserves its right to say when it will be the right time. And right now, we need to agree on what will be the conditions for that recognition, because I think that recognition will be impactful, because Canada is a country that has a lot of impact in the world, and that's why we're looking at what could be the conditions, and the work being done by the committee is important. Thank you.
Say yes.
Want to hang a shelf, mount a painting, hang a spice rack?
C'est en français aujourd'hui avec des mots d'ouverture. Donc, c'est clair pour néo-démocrates, pour moi personnellement, je crois profondément dans les soins de santé publics et gratuits. Et ça doit aussi inclure les soins dentaires. J'ai parlé avec les familles qui ont reçu cette soins dentaires qu'on a forcé les libéraux de mettre en œuvre, et ça a vraiment changé leur vie. Je pense de Sue, une personne âgée que j'ai rencontrée ici à Ottawa, et le fait qu'elle maintenant peut accéder des soins dentaires, c'est vraiment donner plus de dignité dans sa vie. Et le fait que Premier ministre Legault veut attaquer les gens les plus vulnérables, c'est injuste. Le fait qu'il veut dire à des gens comme Sue que vous ne méritez pas d'avoir accès aux soins dentaires, c'est cruel. Le fait qu'il cible les gens qui vivent dans des CHSLD, le fait qu'il dit non aux gens qui doivent accéder des services de soins dentaires ou des cliniques communautaires, c'est vraiment injuste et il ne doit pas faire ça. On sait que les libéraux et Justin Trudeau sont trop faibles pour se tenir debout pour ces gens. Et on sait que les conservateurs de Pierre Poilievre veulent complètement éliminer ce programme. Donc, on est les seuls gens qui vont se battre pour les Québécois et Québécoises. On va être là pour vous. Je veux aussi noter que demain, c'est fort probable que le Sénat va passer la science médicaments. Donc, j'exige le gouvernement libéral, Justin Trudeau et le reste du gouvernement de commencer tout de suite à négocier des ententes avec les autres provinces pour mettre en œuvre ce programme. Ça veut dire des médicaments pour les diabètes gratuits, les contraceptifs gratuits. On sait que Pierre Poilievre n'est pas d'accord avec les médicaments gratuits pour les diabètes ni les contraceptifs gratuits, mais on va continuer de se battre pour les gens. I'll do that again in English, and then I look forward to your questions. We as New Democrats, and me personally, we believe fundamentally that healthcare should be there for people. It should be public, it should be universal, and it should not cost you anything. On top of that, we believe that should include dental care. We have seen the impact that our dental care program has had on people. I think about Sue, someone who's retired, a senior living in Ottawa who I met, who lost her teeth because of cancer treatment. She's a cancer survivor and went to a dentist. There was a dentist there. I was with her when she went to that visit, and she just wanted her smile back. And I saw the tears of joy on her face when she was told by the dentist and the dentist that she will get her smile back. The fact that Premier Legault wants to say no to someone like Sue, wants to target some of the most vulnerable people in our country and say they should not be able to access dental care is wrong, it's cruel, it's unjust, and we're going to fight back. We know that the Liberals do not have the courage, have shown they're too weak to stand up to Conservative premiers, but we are ready to do so. And we also know that Conservatives and Pierre Poilievre want to eliminate dental care entirely. We're the only ones that have people's back on this, and we're going to continue to fight for them.
Combien de temps est-ce que vous allez continuer à participer à la paralysie parlementaire? Puis qu'est-ce que vous faites l'argument des libéraux qui disent de toute façon ces documents-là, la GRC n'en veut pas, puis il y a peut-être un enjeu de charte aussi là-dedans?
On behalf of the Green Party of Canada, Elizabeth May, Mike Morris, MP for Kitchener Centre, we just wanted to comment briefly on
the fascinating debate, which has occupied us now up until day 6. It looks like we'll be resuming it again after Thanksgiving. So we can be grateful for a small break while we gather with family and friends and bow our heads. I did get a chance to speak for a full 20 minutes on what the Green Party of Canada makes of the SDTC issue. I wanted to clarify that I think at this point, having served in this place since 2011, recent events represent a new low in lack of civility coupled with lack of productivity. It's an enormous waste of time and waste of money for Canadians. It's not to say, and I want to underline this, je veux souligner que ce n'est pas un enjeu qui manque d'importance. C'est clair qu'il y a les choses qui ont passé dans le Conseil pour le développement durable et technologique que ce n'est pas acceptable. It's never acceptable when you have a board of directors and a chair of a board of directors who ignore conflict of interest guidelines. But that is not to say that this is an example of liberal patronage, slush funds. We've seen no evidence whatsoever, and I keep asking the Conservatives for some evidence, that Annette Verscheren was in any way a liberal insider. I have been able to find that she advised Jim Flaherty, that Stephen Harper appointed her to the Economic Advisory Council in the 2008 financial crisis. She's a very highly respected business leader and clearly violated conflict of interest guidelines. It should go to committee, it should go to study, and all the documents should be provided. But what we're seeing right now in Parliament between the accusations and somewhat slanderous accusations within Parliament against each other, between official opposition and the government and others, this is not acceptable. We need to do better. I'll just give it to Mike Morris for a moment.
That's great. We can leave
okay, well, any questions for either of us en français or anglais?
To move closure on the debate, would you support it?
Oui, bien sûr.
We're also not continuing to speak on the motion. Elizabeth had a 20-minute speech on it already. If this were about the substance of the motion, it would have been voted on already. We'd move on with the rest of the business of the House that Canadians expect parliamentarians to be here to work to solve.
One of the things I tried to point out that hasn't been raised very much is that when you look at the Auditor General's report and the one that preceded it from the Commissioner for Environment and Sustainable Development in 2017 actually, that examined the same fund, the concern was that advertised achievements in reducing greenhouse gases were not being achieved. Quite a number of these fall in the category of carbon capture, utilization, and storage, where the beneficiaries have been the oil sands and big oil. So it's not the case that a bunch of greenie projects were getting money shoveled to them because they were liberals. There is an important investigation to take place here, but it is much more layered than what we hear in most of the rhetoric in the House.
Should have done the streaming tax differently, and he wants you to scrap it in his words. What do you say?
Well, first of all, it's not a streaming tax. And second of all, Brian Adams had and still has a great career, and I have a lot of admiration for him, and I'm glad that he's participating in this broad conversation. But to be quite frank, the system that the Canadian government is putting in place is mostly for emerging artists and for our local artists in Canada. And if you talk to them, they're going to tell you that online streaming platforms don't pay them enough, and also that it's hard for them to be discovered on these streaming platforms. And this is what the legislation that we passed is intended for. It's to help local Canadian artists both get better pay and also get discovered on these streaming platforms. So we're going to keep on moving forward with this. It's in the hands of the CRTC right now. They made one first decision. It's for a base contribution that Canadian companies have been making for years, and that support the entire Canadian ecosystem. And it was the right thing to do back a few decades ago, and it's still the right thing to do today.
Thank you.
show has been produced by Depictions Media. Please contact us at depictions.media for more information.